Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into a major global event, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan.
That's right. And we're looking at it through a specific lens, drawing from a discussion featuring Zhang Weiwei and Li Weijian, offering a Chinese perspective.
Exactly. We've got this transcript from Yisashi, a YouTube program, which gives a pretty distinct viewpoint on the whole U.S. involvement and, the exit.
So, our goal here is to really unpack what this perspective tells us.
Yeah, we want to dig into their analysis, the causes they see, the consequences for, everyone involved, Afghanistan, the U.S., and the wider sort of geopolitical picture, especially how China fits in.
Okay, so let's dive in. First off, this Chinese perspective we're looking at doesn't really pull any punches, does it?
Not at all. It calls the withdrawal, straight up, a humiliating defeat for the U.S. They even compare it to the fall of Saigon.
Which is quite a statement. And they back it up with some pretty stark figures regarding the U.S. costs.
Yeah, the human costs alone. You've got 2,461 U.S. soldiers killed, then over 4,000 security contractors, many American, also died.
And over 20,000 U.S. troops wounded?
Yeah.
That's a heavy toll. And then there's the financial side, over $2 trillion spent.
$2 trillion? It's almost hard to comprehend. But then you look at the impact on Afghanistan itself, as described in this source, and it's arguably even worse.
It's devastating. The transcript talks about over 200,000 Afghan deaths.
200,000.
And millions, literally millions displaced. And maybe the most shocking statistic they mention is the average life expectancy dropping to just 45 years.
Just 45. Wow. That really puts the long-term human cost into perspective.
It really does.
Yeah.
And the analysis also hits hard on the intelligence front, doesn't it?
Yeah. A major failure highlighted is how the U.S. apparently assessed the Afghan government forces. They seem to have massively overestimated their ability, or maybe their will, to resist the Taliban.
Right. And interestingly, this discussion brings up another angle to the initial U.S. goals. Beyond just counterterrorism, it suggests a strategic thought about China's Xinjiang region.
Using Afghanistan as a pressure point, potentially. That's not something you hear as much in, say, Western media analyses.
Exactly, as another layer.
Yeah.
But the main political critique here focuses on that whole nation-building strategy.
Or the democracy export strategy, as they call it. The source argues it was based on this perhaps flawed idea that democratizing the Middle East would somehow just solve terrorism.
And the critique is that the U.S. tried to impose its own model, a very American way, without really getting the local Afghan context, a fundamental mismatch, basically.
Presented almost as doomed from the start because of that.
And then there's the corruption. This perspective paints the whole 20-year war effort as just riddled with it.
Well, with that kind of money involved, what was it, $2.26 trillion? Yeah. Which works out to like $300 million a day.
Every single day, yeah. It seems almost inevitable that some of it would go astray. They mentioned things like ghost soldiers.
People on the payroll who didn't actually exist.
Apparently. And inflated contracts within the Afghan government. It sounds like a system ripe for mismanagement and graft.
And connecting that to the U.S. side, the source points to, who profited?
Right, the defense contractors. It mentions the stock prices of the top 5 U.S. defense firms went up almost 9 times during the war years.
9 times. That's quite an incentive structure, isn't it? Really makes you think about the drivers behind prolonged conflicts.
Absolutely. But it wasn't just the long war. The way the withdrawal itself happened is also heavily criticized.
Yeah, the analysis suggests it seriously damaged U.S. credibility.
The speed of it, the apparent lack of consultation with allies, that seems to have caused real friction. They specifically mentioned the UK being quite critical.
And this feeds into a bigger idea discussed in the transcript, right? About a potential shift in the global order.
Exactly. Moving away from what's called Pax Americana, that period of U.S. dominance.
And they even mention talk in the West, maybe speculatively, about a Pax Sinica, a future possibly shaped more by China.
It's a compelling narrative they build. They note Trump criticizing Biden's handling of it and suggest China saw this as, beneficial to its position.
It reinforces that idea of shifting power dynamics.
And they draw that parallel to the Soviet withdrawal back in '89 and what happened to the Soviet Union afterwards. A historical echo, perhaps?
So the core argument is pretty blunt. This withdrawal speeds up America's decline, maybe marks the end of it being the sole superpower.
It's a strong claim, definitely reflects the viewpoint we're exploring.
But it's not just seen as a failure, is it? It's also framed as a strategic choice.
Yes, very much so. The sources argue that leaving Afghanistan is part of a bigger pivot, a strategic shift by the U.S. to focus more on the Asia-Pacific.
To counter China. essentially.
That's the interpretation. And interestingly, they say this idea isn't brand new. Plans to refocus on Asia apparently date back to the Bush administration.
But then 9/11 happened and sort of derailed that.
That's the timeline suggested. And the Xinjiang issue comes up again here.
How so?
As a potential tool the U.S. might use, creating instability on China's border to, hinder its growth.
So you see this thread from Obama's Asia-Pacific rebalancing through Trump's Indo-Pacific strategy, right up to Biden explicitly calling China the main competitor. It's presented as a consistent trend.
A clear strategic pivot, not just abandoning one conflict zone, but actively turning towards another perceived challenge.
And this deep dive looks beyond just military moves, right? It talks about other ways the U.S. is seen as trying to contain China.
Definitely. Things like more U.S. military exercises, naval presence in the South China Sea, the Taiwan Strait, actions viewed as stirring up regional tensions.
And then the economic and tech competition. Huawei is mentioned, obviously, but also manufacturing generally.
Yeah, it's a multi-front competition.
Oh.
And there's clear concern expressed in the transcript about China's Belt and Road Initiative, its growing global influence.
Which the U.S. is trying to counter.
It seems so. They mentioned the 2021 Strategic Competition Act and that Build Back Better World initiative presented as direct responses aimed at challenging the Belt and Road.
Okay, the discussion then kind of zooms out again, critiquing U.S. foreign policy more broadly, talk of realism versus rhetoric.
Yeah, the idea presented is that the U.S. talks a lot about liberal values, democracy, human rights, but its actions are often driven by hard-nosed realism and self-interest.
And the military-industrial complex gets brought up again.
As this really powerful force, almost an entity in itself, that benefits from conflict and might even push against presidents who want to end wars.
So the decision to leave Afghanistan, in this rather cynical view, might have partly been because it just wasn't profitable anymore for that complex.
That's one interpretation offered, yes.
Yeah.
A calculation based on return on investment, so to speak.
Right. So the U.S. leaves. What happens next in the region? The power vacuum idea.
Exactly. A huge vacuum in a really strategic spot. The source suggests the U.S. has lost leverage, and maybe some partners are rethinking things. They mention India's relationship with the Taliban becoming strained, for example.
But China is stepping in, or engaging at least.
There's discussion about China engaging with the Taliban, yeah. Talk about potentially including Afghanistan in the Belt and Road, maybe expanding the China-Pakistan economic corridor.
But not unconditionally.
No, absolutely not. The sources are clear. China has conditions. Things like an inclusive government in Afghanistan, moderate policies, and crucially, a clean break from terrorist groups.
Still, even without troops, the U.S. isn't completely out of the picture, is it? Sanctions are mentioned.
Right. Economic tools, financial levers. The U.S. likely still has ways to exert influence.
The transcript also touches on kind of the law of unintended consequences in the Middle East from past U.S. actions.
Yeah, like relations improving between Iraq and Iran after the U.S. intervention in Iraq. Things don't always play out as intended.
And the overall feeling described in the region
is that most countries just want peace, stability, development. They're tired of conflict. That seems to be the dominant desire.
The deep dive then lists the typical methods the U.S. has used for intervention in the Middle East over the years.
Yeah, things like interfering in domestic politics.
Using security ties to sell arms.
And, of course, economic sanctions. A familiar toolkit.
And how is that playing out now? What are the perspectives within the Middle East, according to this source?
Well, there's apparently growing anti-American sentiment linked to the instability people feel U.S. interventions have caused.
And an alternative model gaining traction.
Seems so. Growing interest in the Chinese development model, their governance approach. The focus is shifting maybe from just security to development and stability.
Okay, let's focus back on Afghanistan itself, its future. The transcript emphasizes its long, troubled history, right?
Yeah, nearly half a century of conflict. It really stresses that sustainable stability has to come from within Afghanistan, not just from outside aid.
Because the external models haven't worked. Not the Soviet one, not the U.S. one. And the Taliban's first time in power wasn't exactly a success story either.
Right. There's an interesting, though heavily qualified, comparison made to the Chinese Communist Revolution.
How so?
Suggesting that Afghanistan hasn't undergone the same kind of deep social transformation, which might be holding back its development towards stability. It's a complex analogy, but it points to the need for fundamental internal change.
Ultimately, it comes down to leadership and effective political structures within Afghanistan itself.
That's presented as key. Which leads to the question of immediate help versus long-term strategy.
Sanctions versus aid. Western countries are considering sanctions.
Well, China has already committed, what was it, 200 million RMB in humanitarian aid?
But the source suggests China might offer more than just aid.
Potentially, yeah. Assistance with long-term development planning, trying to tackle those root causes of instability, of displacement.
Which brings us to the tough question of responsibility for this long war.
The transcript delves into that. Which U.S. president bears the most blame? But it also looks at the system.
The power of the U.S. president as commander-in-chief, able to launch military action pretty unilaterally. That's highlighted.
And again, the influence of that military-industrial complex, potentially shaping decisions about going to war and staying at war. It's portrayed as a systemic issue, not just about one leader.
Okay, and finally, the refugee crisis. A direct consequence of all this instability.
Yes. The transcript mentions the Taliban spokesperson's comments on people leaving, drawing a somewhat controversial parallel to emigration from India to the U.S.
But the core point made is about U.S. responsibility.
Very much so. The argument presented is that the U.S. bears direct responsibility for the conditions leading to this refugee crisis because of its actions over 20 years. Some even suggest reparations.
Though it's complex, isn't it? People leave for many reasons.
Absolutely. Fear of the Taliban's return, their past records, those are acknowledged as genuine reasons why people are fleeing.
So the onus is on the Taliban now.
To take real steps, concrete actions, to change their image, reassure people, that's emphasized.
And the international community's role?
Immediate humanitarian help is crucial: food, medicine. But the long-term fix for the refugee crisis, the source argues, has to be Afghanistan achieving its own development and stability.
Right. So pulling this all together from our deep dive today, this Chinese perspective really frames the U.S. withdrawal as more than just military. It's seen as a major political blow, a hit to U.S. reputation.
And maybe speeding up those shifts in global power we talked about, it also really highlights for you just how complex intervention and nation building are. So many challenges.
Yeah, and it strongly emphasizes that Afghanistan's future really depends on internal factors, on finding its own path to stability.
And alongside that, this growing interest you see mentioned in other models, like China's, for development in a changing world.
Okay, so here's something to leave you with. Afghanistan has this incredibly long history of outside powers getting involved, alongside its own internal conflicts. What kind of fundamental changes, both inside Afghanistan and in how outsiders approach it, are actually needed for any kind of lasting peace? And is it even possible for external actors to play a genuinely constructive role without just repeating the mistakes we've seen before?
A lot to think about there. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.